Chapter 1. The blood on her hands. Castle had been silent for 3 days. Alara pressed her back against the stone wall of the servants' corridor, her breath forming pale clouds in the frigid air. The cleaning rag in her hand dripped diluted blood onto the flagstones. She'd been scrubbing the grand hall's marble floor for hours, trying to erase the evidence of whatever violence had occurred before. Lord Cashin's household staff had been summoned back to work. They never told the servants what happened during the dark months. They only cleaned up after. The castle. Mordain stood on the edge of the Winterwood, a gothic monstrosity of spires and shadowed courtyards that loomed over the village below like a sleeping predator. Alara had taken the position as chambermaid 6 months ago, desperate and hollow-eyed, fleeing a scandal that had destroyed her family's name, her father's debts, her sister's elopement, the whispers that followed her through the market square. Here at least, no one asked questions. The pay was extraordinary. The work was simple. And Lord Cashin Mordain, the castle's master, was rarely in residence, until tonight. Alara heard the commotion first, the sudden rush of footsteps in the entrance hall, the low urgent voices of the senior staff. She'd been in the kitchens, preparing her evening meal, when the head housekeeper burst through the door with wild eyes. "He's returned early, Mrs. Thorne hissed, gripping Alara's arm with uncharacteristic force. 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Something's wrong." The other servants exchanged frightened glances. Lord Cashin never altered his patterns. He departed for the capital at the first autumn frost, and returned only when spring softened the roads. His absence was as reliable as the seasons. "What do we do?" someone whispered. "Your posts, Mrs. Thorne snapped. Now. And if you value your positions, if you value your lives, you will see nothing, hear nothing, and speak nothing of what occurs tonight." Alara had been assigned to the East Wing, the oldest part of the castle, where guest chambers gathered dust and silence. She was to ensure fresh linens were placed in 3 specific rooms, candles lit, fires prepared. No explanations given. She'd done as instructed, moving through the shadowed corridors with practiced efficiency. But as she descended the narrow servant stair, she'd heard a sound that didn't belong, a groan, low and ragged, edged with pain. Alara froze on the landing, her pulse suddenly loud in her ears. The sound came again, echoing from somewhere below, followed by the scrape of something heavy being dragged across stone. Every instinct screamed at her to return to her room, lock the door, and pretend she'd heard nothing. But 6 months of silence had taught her that curiosity was a dangerous companion to grief, and Alara had spent too long being invisible. She descended. The lower corridor was darker than the rest, lit only by a single guttering torch. The air smelled of damp stone and something metallic and sharp that made her stomach turn. Blood. She found him in the wine cellar. Lord Cashin Mordain was on his knees beside an overturned rack, one hand pressed against his side, the other braced on the floor. Dark liquid seeped between his fingers, pooling on the stone beneath him. His coat was torn, his normally immaculate appearance shattered, but it was his face that made Alara's breath catch, pale as moonlight, beautiful in a way that seemed carved rather than born, and his eyes gray as winter storms fixed on her with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Alara's hands tightened on her skirts. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except stand there staring at her employer as he bled out in the wine cellar. "You're injured," she heard herself say instead. "Let me help." No, the word cracked like a whip. "Leave, now." But even as he spoke, she saw him sway, his grip on the floor faltering. Whatever wound he carried, it was draining him fast. Alara made a choice. She crossed the cellar in 3 quick steps, dropped to her knees beside him, and reached for his coat. "I've tended wounds before. My mother was a healer. Let me see." His hand shot out, closing around her wrist with impossible strength. She gasped, not from pain, but from the cold. His skin was like ice, bloodless and smooth as marble. "You don't understand," he said. And for the first time, she heard something beneath the command. "Fear. If you stay, you'll see things you cannot unsee. You'll learn truths that will destroy the simple life you're clinging to." Alara met his storm gray eyes and saw her own reflection there, small, frightened, insignificant. She'd spent 6 months trying to disappear. 6 months accepting invisibility as the price of survival. "My simple life was already destroyed," she said quietly. "That's why I'm here." Something shifted in his expression. The grip on her wrist loosened, though he didn't release her. "Then you should know," Lord Cashin said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "that I am not what you think I am. This castle is not what it seems. And if you choose to help me tonight, there will be no going back to the ignorance that has kept you safe." Alara looked at the blood seeping through his fingers, at the unnatural pallor of his skin, at the inhuman grace, even in his weakened state. She thought of the empty months, the whispered warnings, The servants who never ask questions, tell me what to do, she said. Lord Cashin's eyes widened slightly, as if he'd expected a different answer. Then, with obvious reluctance, he released her wrist and pulled his hand away from his side. The wound beneath was like nothing Alara had ever seen, not a blade cut, but something torn, as if claws had ripped through flesh. And the blood that welled from it was too dark, almost black in the torchlight. The cabinet behind you, he said through gritted teeth. Glass bottles. Green wax seals. Bring me two. She scrambled to obey, her hands shaking as she retrieved the bottles. The liquid inside was thick and dark, darker even than wine. He took one bottle, broke the seal with his teeth, and drank. The effect was immediate. Color flooded back into his face, and the tension in his shoulders eased. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, then opened them to find her staring. You have questions, he said. Yes, then ask quickly. We don't have much time before others arrive. And when they do, he paused, his gaze sharp and assessing. When they do, you must stay silent, completely silent, no matter what you see or hear. Can you do that? Alara nodded slowly, though her mind was racing. What are you? She whispered. Lord Cashin's smile was terrible and beautiful. The monster your grandmother warned you about, he said. And now, Miss Alara, you belong to a world that will never let you go. Chapter 2. The House of Shadow. Alara barely had time to process his words before Lord Cashin's head snapped toward the cellar entrance, his entire body going rigid with predatory alertness. They're here, he said, his voice dropping to something barely human. Get behind the wine racks. Don't move. Don't breathe loudly. And for God's sake, don't let them smell your fear. Smell my now. The command in his voice moved her before thought could. Alara scrambled into the shadows behind the towering wine racks, wedging herself into the narrow space between wood and stone wall. Through the gaps between bottles, she could see Lord Cashin rise to his feet with fluid grace, all evidence of his injury masked behind an expression of cold, aristocratic disdain. The wound at his side had already stopped bleeding. Footsteps echoed down the corridor multiple sets, moving with a natural synchronization. Alara pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing, as three figures entered the cellar. They wore traveling cloaks of deep burgundy, and beneath the hoods, Alara glimpsed faces of impossible beauty. Two men and a woman, all pale as Lord Cashin, all moving with that same liquid grace that suggested violence wrapped in silk. Cashin, the woman spoke first, pulling back her hood to reveal hair like spilled ink and eyes the color of old blood. How unexpected to find you bleeding in your own wine cellar. The mighty lord of House Mordain, reduced to crawling in the dark. Lady Serafini, Lord Cashin's voice was ice over steel. You're trespassing. The Accord grants you no rights within my borders without invitation. The Accord. Serafini laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Such human concerns. Borders. Invitations. You've grown soft, Cashin, playing lord of the manor while your house crumbles around you. One of the men stepped forward tall, with golden hair and a smile that made Alara's skin crawl. We come bearing news from the Night Court. Your petition has been denied. House Mordain will cede the Winterwood territories to House Corvus by the winter solstice, or face formal challenge. Alara watched Lord Cashin's hands curl into fists at his sides. I submitted documentation of my family's claim dating back for centuries. The Winterwood has been Mordain land since before you were made, the second man interrupted. He was darker than his companion, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. But the court cares little for history when the present shows weakness. You hold these lands alone, Cashin. No blood-bound allies. No house sworn to your banner. Just you and your pathetic collection of human servants who don't even know what sleeps in their master's chambers. Serafini circled closer, her movements serpentine. The attack tonight was merely a demonstration. House Corvus has 12 blood-sworn warriors. House Ravencroft stands with us. Even House Sylvanus, your oldest ally, has withdrawn their support. She paused directly in front of him. You're alone. Surrender the territory peacefully, or we'll take it over your ashes. The Accord forbids blood challenges during the harvest months, Lord Cashin said flatly. The Accord, Serafini murmured, is about to change. The old laws served their purpose when we hid in shadows, but times have evolved. The Night Court grows tired of restraint. She leaned closer, inhaling deeply. And you, dear Cashin, grow tired of fighting. I can smell it on you. The loneliness, the weight of centuries. How long has it been since you truly fed? Since you felt the pulse of life between your teeth? Alara's hand pressed harder against her mouth. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Lord Cashin's expression didn't change. Get out of my house. Such fire. The golden-haired man mocked. Perhaps there's some fight left in you after all. Leave, Lord Cashin repeated, and this time his voice carried something that made the bottles around Alara rattle in their racks. Or I'll remind you why House Mordain has held these lands for 400 years. Challenge or no challenge, I am still a lord in my own home, and you are nothing but messengers playing at threat. The temperature in the cellar dropped. Elara could see her breath now, crystallizing in the air. Serafini's smile sharpened, revealing teeth to white and to perfect. Very well. We'll deliver your defiance to the court. But know this, Cashin, when we return at the solstice, it will be with the full might of the allied houses. And your precious accord won't save you. She turned to leave, her companions following, but paused at the threshold. Oh, and Cashin, you might want to check your perimeter more carefully. Something smells mortal and fresh. Elara's blood turned to ice. Lord Cashin didn't move, didn't betray even a flicker of reaction. My servants are my concern, not yours, of course. Serafini's smile was knowing. Do give my regards to your staff. Such loyalty is rare these days. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Then they were gone, their footsteps fading up the corridor like a receding nightmare. Elara remained frozen behind the wine racks, her entire body shaking. She counted to 100, then 200, before Lord Cashin finally spoke. You can come out now. She emerged on trembling legs, her back aching from being pressed against the stone. Lord Cashin stood exactly where he'd been, staring at the empty doorway with an expression she couldn't read. What were they? She whispered. Vampires. He said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. As am I. As are the heads of 7 great houses who rule the territories of this region according to laws older than your country's history. Elara's knees threatened to give out. She gripped the wine rack for support. The stories are true. All of them. Some of them. He turned to face her fully. We don't turn into bats. We don't fear garlic. Running water doesn't harm us. But sunlight? He gestured to his pale skin. That would burn me to ash in minutes. And blood. He paused. Blood is both our sustenance and our curse. You drink from people, with consent, he said sharply. Or at least, I do. The old laws, the accord they mentioned, it binds us to rules of engagement with humans. No killing. No turning without explicit permission. No feeding without consent, freely given. His jaw tightened. But those laws are being challenged. House Corvus wants to return to the old ways. When vampires were predators and humans were prey, Elara's mind reeled. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved my life tonight. Lord Cashin moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. That wound would have weakened me enough for them to finish what they started. But you brought me the blood stores that restored my strength. You hid when I commanded it. You kept silent when discovery would have meant your death. He studied her with those storm-gray eyes. You've earned the truth. And now you must choose. Choose what? Whether to leave at dawn with enough gold to start fresh somewhere far from here, he said quietly, or stay, knowing that this castle will become a battlefield before winter ends. That you'll see horrors that will haunt you. That you'll be in constant danger from forces you cannot fight. Elara thought of the village below, where her family's name was still whispered with shame. Of the tiny rented room she'd left behind, where every breath had tasted of defeat. If I stay, she said slowly, what would you need from me? Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or the faintest hint of hope. An ally, Lord Cashin said. In a war I cannot win alone. Chapter 3. The Barganella didn't sleep that night. Lord Cashin had given her until dawn to decide, then disappeared into the upper floors of the castle with that unnatural speed that made her question everything she'd ever believed about the world. She'd returned to her small chamber in the servants' wing, locked the door, and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, watching moonlight crawl across the floor. Vampires were real. The word felt absurd, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. Yet she'd seen the evidence, the impossible pallor of their skin, the inhuman grace. The way Lord Cashin's wound had stopped bleeding after he'd drunk from those dark bottles. Blood. He'd drunk blood. She should be horrified, terrified, running. Instead, she found herself remembering the fear in his voice when he'd warned her away. The loneliness Lady Serafini had mentioned, the weight of centuries. He'd been alone in this vast castle for longer than Elara had been alive, holding territory against enemies who wanted to tear down the very laws that kept humans safe. Her family had called her reckless, foolish, too curious for her own good. Perhaps they'd been right. When the first pale light touched her window, Elara rose, washed her face in the cold basin water, and made her way through the silent castle to Lord Cashin's study. She found him standing before the tall windows, heavy curtains drawn against the approaching sunrise. He'd changed clothes, now dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, looking more human than he had in the cellar. Almost. I'm staying, Elara said, without preamble. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. You should ask what I expect in return. Then I'm asking. Lord Cashin moved to the massive desk dominating the room and extracted a leather-bound journal from a locked drawer. He placed it on the desk between them like an offering. First, you need to understand what you've walked into. Elara approached cautiously, looking down at the journal. The cover was embossed with a symbol, a raven perched on a crescent moon. That's the seal of House Mordain, he said. My house. One of 7 great houses that govern vampire society in this region. He opened the journal, revealing pages filled with elegant script and detailed drawings. Each house controls specific territories and maintains different philosophies about our relationship with humanity. He pointed to the first page, where 7 symbols were drawn in a circle. House Mordain, that's mine. We believe in the accord, in coexistence, in the old laws that prevent us from becoming the monsters humans fear. His finger moved to the next symbol. House Corvus. They believe vampires should rule openly, that humans are cattle to be herded and used. Lady Serafini leads them now. She's the one who came last night. Elara said, yes. And she's rallied 2 other houses to her cause, Ravencroft and Sylvanus. Together, they have enough power to challenge the accord in the Night Court. He flipped to another page showing what looked like a grand chamber carved from black stone. The court mediates disputes between houses and enforces our laws. But laws only matter when those in power choose to uphold them. Elara studied the drawings, maps of territories, genealogies of vampire bloodlines, detailed notes about feeding customs and blood oaths. What's a blood oath? Lord Cashin's jaw tightened. A bond formed when a vampire shares blood with another being, human or vampire. It creates a connection that cannot be broken except by death. Some houses use it to bind human servants to their will. Others, like mine, use it only in the most sacred of alliances. Have you ever? Once, he said quietly. Centuries ago. She died. He closed the journal abruptly. That's not what I need from you. Then what do you need? He met her eyes directly. Information, strategy, a human perspective on defenses they won't anticipate. House Corvus expects me to fight like a vampire with strength, speed, ancient power. But you think differently. You see vulnerabilities I've grown blind to over the centuries. Elara crossed her arms, studying him. You want me to help you in a war. I want you to help me survive long enough to prevent one. He moved around the desk, his intensity almost overwhelming. If House Corvus takes the Winterwood, they'll have control of the mountain passes. They'll cut off the northern territories from the rest of vampire society and install their own laws. Humans in those regions will have no protection. The accord will crumble, and will return to the Dark Ages, when vampire lords treated villages like feeding grounds. The weight of it pressed against Elara's chest. How many humans live in those territories? 50,000. Maybe more. She exhaled slowly. And you're the only thing standing between them and that. Fate. Yes. That's a lot of weight for one person to carry. Something cracked in his controlled expression, a flash of exhaustion so deep it made her heart ache. I've carried it for 300 years. I can carry it longer. You shouldn't have to carry it alone, Elara said, before she could stop herself. Lord Cashin stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. You barely know me. You have no reason to. I have every reason, she interrupted. You're trying to protect people who don't even know you exist. That makes you better than most humans I've known. She thought of her father, who'd gambled away their security. Her sister, who'd fled rather than face consequences. The villagers, who'd whispered behind her back rather than offer help. At least you're fighting for something that matters. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. This will be dangerous. They'll target you if they discover you're helping me. I understand. You could die. I could die crossing the street. At least this way, it means something. Lord Cashin's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite name, respect, perhaps, mixed with a wariness that suggested he wasn't used to trusting anyone. Very well. But we do this my way, with precautions. He moved to a cabinet and withdrew another bottle with a green wax seal. First lesson: vampire blood has properties beyond sustaining us. In small amounts, it can heal human wounds, grant temporary strength, even extend life. Elara's eyes widened. You're offering me your blood? A few drops, no more. Enough to help you heal faster if you're injured, to give you an edge if you need to run. He broke the seal, carefully, but never more than that. Too much vampire blood in a human system creates a dependency. An addiction that destroys the mind. He poured a small amount into a glass vial and held it out. The liquid was dark as midnight, seeming to absorb the lamplight rather than reflect it. Elara took the vial with trembling fingers. What do I do? Keep it with you. Only use it in emergencies. His eyes held hers. And trust that I will do everything in my power to ensure you never need it. She tucked the vial into her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. What now? Lord Cashin returned to his desk and spread out a map of the castle and surrounding lands. Now, we prepare. The solstice is 6 weeks away. That's how long we have to fortify this castle, gather intelligence on House Corvus's forces, and find a way to survive what's coming. Elara leaned over the map, studying the layout with fresh eyes. Tell me everything. Every weakness in your defenses. Every assumption you've made, everything, for the first time since she'd met him. Lord Cashin smiled a real smile that transformed his face from coldly beautiful to something achingly human. Very well, Miss Alara, he said. Let's begin. Chapter 4. Lessons in Darkness. Castle transformed over the following week. What had seemed like a Gothic monument to solitude became something else entirely under Alara's new awareness, a fortress designed with purpose, every shadow and corridor calculated for defense against threats that moved faster than human eyes could track. Lord Cashin proved to be an exacting teacher. He walked her through the castle's architecture during the nights, explaining how the narrow windows were designed to prevent multiple vampires from entering simultaneously, how certain chambers were lined with iron and metal that weakened vampire healing, and how the catacombs beneath the castle formed a labyrinth that only he knew completely. Most vampires rely on their physical advantages, he explained, as they stood in the armory, a chamber Alara had never been permitted to enter before. Weapons lined the walls, swords, crossbows, and stranger implements she couldn't name. Speed, strength, enhanced senses. But those advantages disappear when the environment is controlled. Alara ran her fingers along a crossbow carved with intricate symbols. What are these markings? Protective wards. Blessed by a priestess centuries ago who understood what lived in these hills. Lord Cashin lifted the weapon carefully. A bolt from this crossbow won't kill a vampire, but it will paralyze them long enough to gain advantage. Wood through the heart is mostly myth. It hurts, but it's not fatal. Decapitation or burning are the only certain methods. She tried to imagine him teaching her how to kill his own kind, and failed. Have you ever had to? Yes. He set the crossbow down with careful precision. House Mordain has enemies beyond House Corvus. Over the centuries, I've fought challenges, defended my borders, protected my territory. His expression darkened. I've killed both vampires and humans who threatened what I've built here. Alara absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the controlled, almost gentle man before her with the warrior he described. Do you regret it? Every death, he said quietly. Even the necessary ones. That's the difference between houses like mine and houses like Corvus. They've lived so long they've forgotten that every life taken diminishes us. I refuse to forget. Something in her chest tightened at the raw honesty in his voice. They continued their nocturnal lessons. Lord Cashin taught her the structure of vampire society, how new vampires were made only with explicit consent and approval from the Night Court, how feeding required negotiated agreements with willing humans, how breaking the Accord's laws meant punishment by the assembled houses. But the system only works when everyone believes in it, he said, as they sat in his study on the fifth night. Maps and documents spread between them. House Corvus has been undermining the Accord for decades. Small violations at first feeding. Without proper contracts, intimidating human settlements. The court issued warnings, but no real punishment. Why not? Alara asked, pouring tea for herself while he sipped from one of his dark bottles. She'd learned not to ask what was in them. She already knew. Because House Corvus controls the largest territory and the most blood-sworn vampires. They're too powerful to challenge directly without risking full civil war. He traced a line on the map showing the extent of Corvus lands. So the court looks away, hoping the problem will resolve itself. Meanwhile, smaller houses like mine become isolated. Easy targets. Alara studied the map with growing understanding. They're picking you off one by one. Precisely. Lord Cashin's finger moved to the Winterwood territory. I'm the last independent house between Corvus lands and the northern territories. If I fall, they have an unbroken chain of power from the coast to the mountains. Then we make sure you don't fall, Alara said with more confidence than she felt. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, a mixture of appreciation and concern that suggested he wasn't used to having allies. You're taking this remarkably well. What choice do I have? Fall apart? She set down her teacup. I spent 6 months in this castle believing the worst thing in my life was my family's scandal. Now I know there are worse things than social ruin. At least here, I'm doing something that matters. Your family's scandal, Lord Cashin said slowly. You've never told me what happened. Alara's hand stilled on her cup. She'd avoided thinking about it for so long that the memories felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. My father owed money to dangerous people. He made bad investments, gambled trying to recoup his losses, and fell deeper into debt. When the creditors came, he used my sister as collateral, promised her in marriage to clear his obligations. Lord Cashin's eyes narrowed dangerously. He sold his daughter. She refused. Eloped with a merchant's son instead. Alara's voice remained steady, though the old wounds still ached. The scandal destroyed what was left of our family's reputation. My father drank himself to death within a year. My mother retreated to her sister's house, and as she met his gaze, I became the daughter of the man who tried to trade his child for coins. No one in the village would employ me. No one would even speak to me. So you came here, the farthest position I could find, a castle in the mountains, where no one knew my name or my family's shame. She smiled without humor. I thought I was running away. Turns out I was running towards something worse, or something better, Lord Cashin said softly. The unexpected kindness in his voice made her throat tighten. She looked away, blinking against the sudden heat in her eyes. You don't have to, I mean it. He leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. Your father treated you as disposable. Your village judged you for someone else's sins. But you're here, choosing to stand against forces that terrify trained warriors, because you believe it's right. That's not worse, Alara. That's extraordinary. No one had called her extraordinary before. Reckless, yes. Foolish, certainly, but never extraordinary. I'm just trying to survive, she whispered. No, Lord Cashin said. You're trying to live. There's a difference. He stood, moving to the window where the curtains blocked out the pre-dawn light. Survival is what I've been doing for 3 centuries. Existing in this castle, maintaining my territory, following the same patterns year after year. But living? That requires hope, connection, the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. He turned back to her. You reminded me of that. Alara's heart hammered in her chest. The air between them felt charged with something she didn't dare name. The sun will rise soon, she said, her voice barely steady. You should rest. Yes. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he remained by the window, studying her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see too much. Alara, I need you to understand something. The connection we're building, this alliance, it's dangerous in ways beyond the physical threats. What do you mean? Vampires feel things intensely. Emotions we develop are magnified by the centuries we carry them. When we form bonds, they run deeper than human connections. His expression was grave. I haven't allowed myself to care about anyone in a very long time. But you're making that difficult. The confession hung between them like a living thing. Alara knew she should retreat, should maintain the professional distance between servant and lord. But honesty seemed to be the currency they traded in now. You're making it difficult for me too, she admitted quietly. Lord Cashin's expression flickered with something that might have been pain or longing, or both. Then we'll have to be careful. Both of us. Careful, Alara repeated. Right. He moved toward the door with that liquid grace, but paused at the threshold. Get some rest. Tomorrow night, I'll show you the catacombs. If House Corvus attacks, that's where you'll need to hide. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone with her racing thoughts and the growing certainty that she was falling into something far more dangerous than vampire politics. Chapter 5. The Catacombs. The entrance to the catacombs lay hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, the same place where Alara had first found Lord Cashin bleeding and vulnerable. Only the heads of House Mordain have known about this entrance, he said, as he pressed a specific stone, causing the wall to swing inward with a grinding sound. Not even my most trusted servants over the centuries have been shown this path. Alara felt the weight of that trust as she followed him into the darkness. He carried a lamp, its light casting dancing shadows on walls that seemed to swallow illumination. The air grew colder with each descending step, carrying the scent of earth and stone and something older. These tunnels were here long before the castle, Lord Cashin explained, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. The original inhabitants used them for rituals. When my house claimed this land, we built the fortress above to guard what lay below. What lies below? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led her through a series of turns that she tried desperately to memorize. Left, right, straight, down another staircase, right again. The tunnels branched in dozens of directions, a maze that would trap anyone who didn't know the correct path. Finally, they emerged into a chamber that made Alara's breath catch. It was vast, the ceiling lost in shadows, high above. The walls were carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift in the lamplight, the same protective wards she'd seen on the weapons in the armory, but larger, more complex. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and behind it, a door of black iron covered in more symbols. This is the heart of House Mordain's power, Lord Cashin said quietly. The vault. Alara moved closer to the iron door, feeling a strange pull emanating from whatever lay behind it. What's inside? Records. Blood stores that are centuries old. Artifacts from the founding of our house. He set the lamp on the altar. And something more important, proof of our original charter with the Night Court. Documentation that cannot be forged or denied, showing that the Winterwood has belonged to House Mordain since the accord was first written. Understanding dawned. That's why they want this castle. It's not just about territory. No, if House Corvus can destroy that documentation, they can claim the Winterwood was never legitimately Mordain land. The Night Court would have no choice but to rule in their favor. Lord Cashin's expression hardened. This vault is what I'm truly protecting. If it falls, So does any legal claim. My house has to exist. Alara studied the iron door, the weight of centuries pressing against her awareness. How do you open it? Blood. He withdrew a small knife from his coat. Only blood of the direct Mordain line can unlock these wards. Without hesitation, he drew the blade across his palm. Dark blood welled up, and he pressed his hand against a specific symbol on the door. The wards flared with pale blue light, and the door swung open silently. Inside was a chamber smaller than Alara expected. Its walls lined with shelves holding leather-bound volumes, sealed boxes, and glass containers filled with that same dark liquid she'd seen him drink. But what drew her attention was the portrait hanging on the far wall. A woman looked out from the canvas, her beauty almost painful to witness. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes that seemed alive even in paint. She wore a gown from another era, and smiled with the same sad wisdom Alara sometimes glimpsed in Lord Cashin's expression. Morgana, he said softly, following her gaze. My wife. Alara's chest constricted. The blood oath you mentioned. Yes. He moved to stand before the portrait, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. She was human when we met. A scholar, studying the old languages and rituals. She came to the castle seeking access to our library, and, he paused. I fell in love with her. Truly, deeply, in a way I hadn't thought possible for someone who'd already lived 200 years. What happened? She chose to become vampire. We formed the blood oath, and for 50 years, we ruled House Mordain together. His voice grew rough. Then House Corvus, led by Serafini's grandfather at the time, challenged our territory. Morgana was killed in the fighting. Beheaded while I was occupied defending the eastern border. The pain in his voice was so acute that Alara had to resist the urge to reach for him. I'm so sorry. That was 150 years ago. I've had time to grieve, but the way he looked at the portrait suggested that time meant little when you carried eternity. I haven't allowed myself to care for anyone since. It seemed safer, easier, lonelier, Alara said quietly. He turned to face her fully. Yes, that too. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he'd worn for over a century. You asked me once why I'm telling you all this. The truth is, I'm not certain anymore whether I'm preparing you to help defend the castle or simply. He trailed off. Simply what? Simply trying not to be alone, he admitted. After so many years of isolation, having someone who knows what I am, who chooses to stay anyway, it's dangerous and necessary in equal measure. The vulnerability in his confession made Alara's heart ache. She thought of her own isolation, the months of silence and invisibility she'd endured. Maybe they'd both been alone for too long, before she could respond. A sound echoed through the catacombs, distant but distinct. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Lord Cashin's entire demeanor changed instantly. Predatory alertness replacing vulnerability. Someone's in the tunnels. How is that possible? You said no one knows. They shouldn't. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a shadowed alcove behind the altar. Hide. Don't make a sound. Whatever happens, don't reveal yourself. But now, Alara. She pressed herself into the alcove just as three figures emerged from the tunnel entrance. Even in the dim lamplight, Alara recognized them, the same vampires who'd threatened Lord Cashin in the wine cellar. Lady Serafini, flanked by her golden-haired and scarred companions. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them walked Mrs. Thorne, the head housekeeper, her expression blank and her eyes oddly glassy. Hello, Cashin, Serafini purred, her gaze sweeping the chamber. Thank you for the tour. Your housekeeper was most helpful in showing us the way. Lord Cashin stood before the vault, his body positioned to block their access. What did you do to her? A simple compulsion. Nothing permanent. Serafini's smile was cruel. Though I must say, your precious accord makes such things deliciously easy. We can't kill humans without consequences, but influencing their minds? That's technically within the rules. Mrs. Thorne swayed slightly, her lips moving soundlessly. Let her go, Lord Cashin said, his voice deadly calm. Your quarrel is with me. Oh, we will. Once you open that vault and hand over your charter documents, Serafini gestured lazily. Do it now, or we'll see just how much compulsion a human mind can withstand before it breaks completely. From her hiding place, Alara watched Lord Cashin's hands curl into fists. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the terrible choice between protecting his house's legacy and protecting the innocent woman whose mind was being violated, and she knew, with sickening certainty, that House Corvus had just found his weakness. Chapter 6. The human Cardellara's mind raced as she watched the standoff unfold. Mrs. Thorne stood vacant-eyed between the Corvus vampires and Lord Cashin, a human shield they'd weaponized with cruel efficiency. Serafini's smile grew wider as she watched Cashin's internal struggle play across his face. Tick-tock, my lord, she said mockingly. How long before her mind simply fractures? I've seen it happen. The eyes go first, they stop focusing. Then the memories begin to unravel. By the end, there's nothing left but an empty shell that breathes. The accord forbids permanent mental damage, Lord Cashin said. But his voice had lost its certainty. Prove the damage was permanent, the golden-haired vampire countered. Prove it wasn't a natural deterioration of her human faculties. The court moves slowly, Cashin. By the time they investigate, we'll have what we came for. Lord Cashin took a step toward the vault, and Elara knew he was going to surrender. He would sacrifice his house's future to save one human woman because that was who he was, someone who still valued individual lives after 300 years of existence. It was beautiful and foolish and entirely predictable, which meant House Corvus had already won. Unless Elara changed the equation. She thought of the vial of vampire blood in her pocket, the crossbow in the armory, the protective wards carved throughout the catacombs. She thought of Lord Cashin teaching her that vampires relied too heavily on their physical advantages, that controlled environments neutralized their strengths, and she thought of something else he'd said: you think differently. You see vulnerabilities I've grown blind to. Elara stepped out of the alcove. Stop, she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. Every head turned toward her. Lord Cashin's expression shifted from shock to fear in the span of a heartbeat. Elara, get back. Hello, little mortal, Serafini interrupted, her blood-red eyes gleaming with interest. How delightful. Cashin's been keeping secrets. She tilted her head, inhaling deeply. And you smell familiar. Were you in the wine cellar the night we visited? Hiding among the bottles like a frightened mouse? Elara forced herself to walk forward with confidence. She didn't feel. I was. And I heard everything you said. About the night court, about your plans, about how you're violating the accord. She met Serafini's gaze directly. How do you think the other houses will respond when they learn you've been using compulsion to invade private territories? The scarred vampire laughed. Bold words from someone whose heart I can hear hammering from here. Do you think threatening us with the court will save you? No, Elara said calmly. But I think you care very much about appearances. About maintaining plausible deniability. She gestured to Mrs. Thorne. This woman is the head housekeeper of a noble estate. When she disappears or goes mad, people will ask questions. Investigations will follow. And while you might escape punishment from the night court, you won't escape the scrutiny. Serafini's smile faded slightly. What are you suggesting? A trade. Elara's mouth was dry, but she kept her voice steady. Release Mrs. Thorne, unharmed, and with no memory of this encounter. In exchange, I'll tell you something you need to know about Lord Cashin's defenses. Elara. No, Lord Cashin started forward. Interesting, Serafini interrupted, holding up one hand to stop him. What could a human servant possibly know that would interest me? The protective wards throughout the castle, Elara said. I know which ones are still active and which ones have degraded over the centuries. I know the patrol schedules of the remaining staff. I know every entrance and exit, including ones that aren't on any official map. She paused. And I know that Lord Cashin sleeps in the East Tower, where the windows face the morning sun. Lord Cashin's face went ashen. The information she'd just revealed could get him killed. Serafini studied Elara with new interest. Why would you betray your lord? Because I want to live, Elara said, injecting just the right amount of desperation into her voice. You're going to win this war. Everyone knows it. Lord Cashin is alone, outnumbered, clinging to outdated laws that no one else respects anymore. When you take this castle, I want to be on the winning side. It was a gamble. Everything depended on Serafini, believing that Elara was exactly what she appeared, to be a frightened human making a coward's bargain. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing heartbeats. Then Serafini smiled. Very well. I accept your trade. She snapped her fingers, and the glassiness in Mrs. Thorne's eyes cleared. The housekeeper swayed, confusion flooding her features. What? Where am I? Mrs. Thorne looked around the chamber in bewilderment. You took a wrong turn in the castle, Serafini said smoothly, her voice carrying an edge of compulsion. You got lost in the lower levels. When you wake tomorrow, you'll remember only that you had a dizzy spell, and Lord Cashin's maid helped you to bed. Mrs. Thorne's expression went blank again, then cleared into a different kind of confusion, the false memory taking root. She nodded slowly and allowed the golden-haired vampire to escort her toward the tunnel entrance. Now then, Serafini said, turning back to Elara, tell me everything. Elara spent the next 10 minutes revealing carefully selected truths mixed with strategic lies. She confirmed the locations of some wards while concealing others. She described patrol schedules that were accurate but incomplete. And when she mentioned the East Tower, she made sure to add that Lord Cashin always bolted the door from inside, a detail that would cost precious seconds for any attacker. Lord Cashin stood frozen throughout, his expression unreadable. She couldn't tell if he understood what she was doing or if he believed she'd genuinely betrayed him. Finally, Serafini seemed satisfied. "You've been most helpful, little mortal. When we return at the solstice, I'll remember your cooperation." She moved toward the tunnel, her companions falling into step beside her. But at the entrance, she paused. "Oh, and Cashin, you might want to reconsider the company you keep. Humans are so wonderfully pragmatic about survival. Loyalty is such a fleeting thing." Then they were gone, their footsteps fading into the labyrinth of tunnels, the moment the sounds disappeared completely. Lord Cashin turned on Alara with fury blazing in his storm-gray eyes. "What were you thinking? You just gave them everything they need to attack exactly where we want them to," Alara interrupted. "The East Tower has 3 escape routes and faces away from the main approach. The wards I mentioned are the oldest ones, barely functional. And the patrol schedules I described were from 2 months ago." He stopped mid-sentence, understanding dawning. "You lied to them. I gave them enough truth to be believable and enough lies to be useful." She was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. "They think I'm a coward looking to save myself. They won't see me as a threat. That gives us an advantage." Lord Cashin stared at her for a long moment. Then unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed strangely in the chamber. "You're either brilliant or insane, probably both," Alara admitted, her knees threatening to give out. He crossed the distance between them into strides and gripped her shoulders, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "That was incredibly dangerous. If they'd sensed you were lying, they would have killed you before I could intervene." "I know," she met his gaze, "but I couldn't let you give up your house's legacy for one person. Not when 50,000 lives depend on you keeping this territory. You're one person," he said quietly. "And you matter too." The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither dared fully acknowledge. "We should prepare," Alara said, breaking the moment before it could become something neither could take back. "They'll attack at the solstice. That gives us for weeks." Lord Cashin's hands dropped from her shoulders, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. 4 weeks to fortify the castle, train you properly, and set a trap that will either save House Mordain or destroy it completely." "No pressure then," Alara said with a shaky smile, his expression softened into something dangerously close to affection. "Together," he said. "We do this together." "Together," Alara agreed, and tried not to think about how much weight that single word carried. Chapter 7. The quiet, hoarsely following 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and carefully controlled chaos. Lord Cashin dismissed most of the human staff, sending them away with generous severance and vague explanations about renovations. Only a handful remained, those who'd served House Mordain for decades and asked no questions about their lord's nocturnal habits. Mrs. Thorne stayed, her memory of the catacombs mercifully erased, managing the reduced household with her usual efficiency. Alara, meanwhile, became something else entirely. By day, she studied the maps and documents Lord Cashin provided, memorizing every defensive position, every escape route, every weakness in the castle's ancient architecture. By night, she trained, again, Lord Cashin said, his voice echoing in the armory. Alara adjusted her grip on the crossbow, her arms trembling with exhaustion. They'd been at this for 3 hours, and her shoulders screamed in protest. But she raised the weapon, sighted along the bolt, and fired. The bolt struck the target dead center. "Better," he conceded, moving to reset the practice dummies. "But you're still taking too long to aim. In a real fight, you'll have seconds at most." "In a real fight," Alara panted, lowering the crossbow. "I'll be hiding in the catacombs like you ordered." "Plans change." He handed her a fresh bolt. "I need to know you can defend yourself if something goes wrong." If the word carried the weight of all the things they didn't discuss, the possibility that House Corvus would overwhelm their defenses, that Lord Cashin would fall in battle, that Alara would be left alone to face creatures who moved like nightmares and smiled like angels. She loaded the bolt with practiced efficiency and fired again. This time, she didn't hesitate. The bolt found its mark in under 3 seconds. Lord Cashin's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "Good, now do it in 2. They trained until dawn threatened, then retreated to the study, where they'd fallen into an unspoken routine. Alara would make tea while Lord Cashin reviewed correspondence from his few remaining allies, minor houses who sympathized with his position, but wouldn't risk open support against Corvus. House Ashenfell sends their regrets, he said dryly, tossing another letter onto the growing pile. Apparently they're too concerned with internal matters to attend the solstice gathering. That's the 5th refusal this week, Alara observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. They're afraid? And rightfully so. He leaned back, rubbing his temples in a gesture so human it made her chest ache. House Corvus has made it clear that anyone who sides with Mordain will be considered an enemy. The smaller houses won't risk it. What about the Night Court? Can't they intervene? They're watching, waiting to see who emerges victorious before committing to a position. His smile was bitter. Politics among immortals moves slowly. They'll debate my petition for another decade while my house burns. Alara studied him in the lamplight, the exhaustion shadowing his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the weight of 3 centuries pressing against his seemingly ageless features. When did you last feed properly? He blinked, surprised by the question. I have the blood stores, that's not what I asked. She'd learned enough about vampire physiology to know that stored blood sustained them but didn't truly nourish them. Fresh blood, willingly given, carried something the preserved versions lacked. You're weaker than you should be. I can see it. I'm fine. You're lying. Alara set down her teacup with deliberate care. How long has it been since you fed from a living person? Lord Cashin's jaw tightened. 7 years. 7, she stared at him. Why? Because feeding creates intimacy, connection, and I couldn't. He looked away. After Morgana, I couldn't bear to form that kind of bond again. The stores were sufficient, safe, distant, and now you're going into battle at half strength because you're afraid of connection, Alara said quietly. His eyes snapped back to hers, storm gray and turbulent. It's not fear. It's wisdom learned through pain. It's both. She stood, moving around the desk before caution could stop her. And it's going to get you killed. They were close enough now that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. Close enough that she could hear the measured control in his breathing. Alara, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a warning and a prayer. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it to me. He was silent for a long moment, wrestling with something she couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Feeding from a willing donor creates a temporary bond. I would taste not just your blood, but your emotions, your thoughts, the essence of who you are. And you would feel what I feel, the hunger, the gratitude, He stopped. It's intensely intimate, more so than almost any human experience. Would it hurt? No, if done properly, it's pleasurable for both parties. That's part of why it's so dangerous. His gaze held hers. I would know you, Alara, truly know you, and you would know me. There would be no hiding, no pretense, just raw, unfiltered truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And that terrifies you. Yes, he admitted. Because once I know you that way, I won't be able to pretend I don't care what happens to you. I won't be able to maintain the distance that keeps both of us safe. Alara thought about the past 3 weeks, the late nights studying together, the training sessions where his hands had steadied hers on the crossbow, the quiet conversations where they'd shared pieces of themselves neither had shown anyone else. The distance he spoke of was already an illusion they both maintained for comfort. I think it's too late for distance, she said softly. Lord Cashin's expression cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Alara, if something happens to you because I allowed this connection to form, if something happens to you because you went into battle weakened, I'll never forgive myself. She reached out, her hand hovering near his. Let me help, please. He caught her hand, his cold fingers wrapping around her warm ones. You're certain? Yes. We'll do this properly then. With consent and care, he drew her closer, his other hand, coming up to cup her face with unexpected gentleness. Tell me if you want to stop. At any point. Promise me. I promise. Lord Cashin's thumb traced her jawline, and Alara shivered at the touch. He guided her to sit on the edge of the desk, positioning himself before her with deliberate care. This will feel strange at first, but focus on my voice. Trust me. I do, she whispered. He leaned in, his breath cool against her throat. Alara's pulse jumped, and she felt him smile against her skin. Relax, he murmured. This is going to be. The first touch of his lips was gentle. Then came a slight pressure, a momentary sting. And then warmth flooded through her, starting where his mouth met her throat and radiating outward in waves of pleasure so intense her fingers dug into his shoulders. She felt him not just physically present but inside her awareness, his consciousness brushing against hers like a second heartbeat, and she knew him, the loneliness of 300 years, the guilt he carried for every life lost under his protection, the fear that he wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough, to hold the legacy his house had built. And underneath it all, a desperate, aching hope that maybe this time, with this woman, things could be different. Alara gasped, as tears streamed down her face. Overwhelmed by the depth of emotion she'd sensed, Lord Cashin pulled back immediately, his eyes wide with concern. Too much. I can stop, don't stop, she managed. Don't you dare stop. He returned to her throat, and this time, when their consciousnesses merged, Alara didn't resist. She let him feel her grief, her determination, her own quiet hope that she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. When he finally drew back, they were both trembling. Alara, he breathed, and it sounded like reverence. She touched his face, feeling the warmth her blood had brought to his skin. "I know," she whispered. "I know." They stayed like that, foreheads pressed together, as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, and neither acknowledged that everything had just changed. Chapter 8. The solstice stormed night of the winter solstice arrived with a natural stillness. Alara stood at the window of Lord Cashin's study, watching snow fall in thick curtains over the winterwood. The castle had been locked down for hours, every entrance barred, every ward activated, every defensive position manned by the handful of staff who'd chosen to stay despite the danger. "They'll come at midnight," Lord Cashin said from behind her. "It's tradition. The longest night of the year, when vampire power peaks and the veil between worlds grows thin." Alara turned to find him dressed for battle, dark leather reinforced with metal plates. Two swords crossed at his back, and an expression of grim determination that reminded her he was more than the careful teacher she'd come to know. He was a 300-year-old warrior who'd survived countless challenges. "The staff are in position?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "In the catacombs as planned. Mrs. Thorne will lead them through the escape tunnels if the castle falls." His eyes met hers. "You should be with them. We've had this argument, and I'm having it again." He crossed to her in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. "Alara, what's coming tonight? You're not ready for it. No amount of training in 3 weeks can prepare a human to face multiple vampires in combat." "I'm not planning to face them in combat," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm planning to use the advantages we discussed. The trapped corridors, the iron-lined chambers, the crossbow positions you said would work. In theory, we don't have time for theory anymore." She covered his hands with hers. "I know you want to protect me, but you can't fight them alone. You need someone watching your back, and I'm the only one here who knows the full plan." Lord Cashin's expression twisted with frustration and fear. Since the feeding a week ago, he'd tried to maintain professional distance, but the bond they'd formed made pretense impossible. She felt his emotions now like a second pulse, the terror of losing her, the guilt of putting her in danger, the desperate wish that he'd sent her away before any of this began. "I can't lose you," he said quietly. "Then, we'd better win." Alara rose on her toes and kissed him, brief and fierce and full of all the words they hadn't spoken. "Together, remember?" Before he could respond, a sound split the night, horn blasts from the castle's main gate, low and ominous. They were here. Lord Cashin's entire demeanor shifted, the warrior rising to the surface. "Stay behind me. Follow the plan exactly. And if I give you an order, you follow it without question. Understood?" "Understood." They moved through the castle with practiced efficiency, reaching the main hall just as the massive oak doors shuddered under an impact that sent splinters flying. 3 more impacts followed, each one cracking the reinforced wood further. "So much for tradition," Lord Cashin muttered. "They're not even waiting for midnight." The doors exploded inward. Lady Serafini entered first, flanked by a dozen vampires in House Corvus colors. But what made Alara's blood run cold were the figures behind them, vampires wearing the symbols of House Ravencroft and House Sylvanus. The alliance had grown. "Cashin Mordain," Serafini announced, her voice carrying through the hall. "By order of the Night Court and the assembled houses of Corvus, Ravencroft, and Sylvanus, you are commanded to surrender your claim to the Winterwood territories and submit to judgment for crimes against vampire law." "Crimes?" Lord Cashin's voice was lethal calm. "What crimes?" The golden-haired vampire stepped forward, unfurling a scroll. "Harboring a human with knowledge of vampire society without court approval. Forming blood bonds without proper documentation. Failure to maintain proper house standing through recognized alliances." He smiled. "Shall I continue?" Alara's stomach dropped. They'd manufactured charges specifically designed to strip him of legal protection. "Those accusations are fabricated," Lord Cashin said. "Are they?" Serafini's gaze slid to Alara. "Then perhaps your little human friend can explain why she carries the scent of your blood. Why her heartbeat syncs with yours even now. Why anyone with half a sense can feel the bond between you." The feeding. They'd sensed it somehow, twisted it into evidence of wrongdoing. "The bond was consensual," Alara said, stepping forward despite Lord Cashin's warning growl. "Formed according to the Accord's provisions for voluntary feeding. Formed without court registration," Serafini countered. "Which makes it illegal under the new statutes passed 3 weeks ago. Statutes you would know about, Cashin, if you'd attended the night court sessions instead of hiding in your castle. New statutes passed without proper notice or debate," Lord Cashin said. "Illegal under the original Accord. The original Accord is being revised. Keep up with the times." Serafini's smile was vicious. "Now, you have 2 choices. Surrender peacefully, and we'll allow you to leave the Winterwood with your life. Resist, and we'll take the castle by force and your human will die in the crossfire." The threat hung in the air like poison. Alara felt Lord Cashin's resolve waver through their bond. He was actually considering surrender to protect her. She couldn't allow that. There's a third choice, Alara said loudly. You could all leave now and avoid the consequences of breaking and entering a protected house territory. Several vampires laughed. Serafini's expression turned predatory. Brave words from someone whose life I could end before she drew another breath. Try it, Lord Cashin snarled, moving to shield Alara. Oh, I will, Serafini gestured. And 6 vampires surged forward. Lord Cashin met them with blinding speed, his swords singing as they cleared their sheaths. The first vampire fell with a scream, his head tumbling away from his body. The second managed to block one strike, but not the second that opened her throat, but there were too many. While Lord Cashin fought, 2 vampires broke off, circling toward Alara with inhuman grace. She ran, not in panic, but according to plan. She led them through the corridor she'd memorized, past the decorative tapestry, through the archway where iron hinges gleamed in lamplight. Behind her, she heard their pursuit, confident, unhurried. Certain of their prey, Alara grabbed the rope hidden behind the tapestry and pulled. The iron gate crashed down from the ceiling, slamming into place with a sound like thunder. The 2 vampires skidded to a stop, hissing as the metal burned their hands when they tried to lift it. Alara raised the crossbow she'd hidden in the alcove and fired. The bolt took the first vampire in the chest. He staggered, clawing at the wood protruding from his ribs. Not fatal, but paralyzing, just as Lord Cashin had promised. She loaded another bolt and fired again. The second vampire dodged, but the motion brought him closer to the iron gate. His shoulder brushed the metal, and he screamed, skin blistering where contact was made. The castle is full of traps like this, Alara called out, her voice steadier than she felt. We've had 3 weeks to prepare. How long did you spend planning your attack? 3 days? 3 hours? From the main hall came the sounds of continued battle, steel on steel, screams both human and inhuman. The crash of furniture being used as weapons. You'll die for this. Human, the burned vampire hissed. Maybe, Alara said, loading a third bolt. But not tonight. She fired again. This time, her aim was true. The bolt struck him in the heart, and he collapsed with a gurgling cry. Paralyzed by the ward-carved wood, Alara took a shaking breath, then ran back toward the main hall. Lord Cashin needed her, and she needed to survive long enough to use the rest of the traps they'd prepared. The battle had only just begun. Chapter 9. Blood in Ashes. The main hall had become a battlefield painted in shadows and moonlight. Alara returned to find Lord Cashin surrounded by 4 vampires. His movements still swift, but slower than before. His blood darkened his left sleeve where a blade had found its mark. He was holding them off, but barely. Serafini watched from the entrance, her expression one of cold amusement. You always were stubborn, Cashin. But stubbornness without strength is just pride waiting to be broken. Alara's mind raced. The iron gate trap had worked, but they'd planned for multiple contingencies. The grand staircase led to the gallery where they'd positioned more crossbows. If she could draw some of the vampires there, she grabbed a decorative vase from a side table and hurled it at the nearest vampire. It shattered against his shoulder. He spun toward her with a snarl, eyes blazing red with bloodlust. Run, Lord Cashin commanded through gritted teeth. Alara ran. She took the stairs 3 at a time, hearing the vampire's pursuit close behind. At the gallery landing, she grabbed the first loaded crossbow from its hidden position and spun. The vampire was already upon her. His hand reaching for her throat, she fired point blank. The bolt struck him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The paralytic wards flared, and he crashed into the railing with a scream of rage and pain. Alara didn't wait to see him fall. She grabbed the second crossbow and aimed at another vampire who'd followed. This one, the scarred companion who'd come with Serafini on that first night. Clever little mouse, he said, advancing slowly. But you'll run out of bolts before we run out of patience. Then I'd better make each one count. She fired. He dodged, but the movement brought him to exactly where she'd anticipated. His foot hit the loose floorboard they'd carefully weakened, and he crashed through to the level below with a satisfying crunch. 2 down. But there were still more. From the main hall came the sound of steel meeting steel. Then Lord Cashin's voice raised in a shout of pain that made Alara's heart seize. She abandoned the crossbows and ran back down the stairs. The scene that greeted her was worse than she'd feared. Lord Cashin was on one knee, a sword protruding from his side. The golden-haired vampire stood over him, smiling with vicious satisfaction. Did you really think you could stand against 3 houses? He asked. You're finished, Mordain. Your line ends tonight. No. Alara's scream tore from her throat. Every vampire in the hall turned to look at her. Serafini's smile widened. Ah, the human shows herself. How touching. She gestured lazily. Take her. Let Cashin watch what happens to those foolish enough to stand with him. 2 vampires moved toward Alara. With predatory grace, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the vial. Lord Cashin had given her weeks ago the vampire. Blood meant only for emergencies. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Alara, don't. Lord Cashin's voice was weak, strained with pain. She drank it in one swallow. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Power flooded through her veins like liquid fire, burning away fatigue and fear. Her senses sharpened until she could hear every heartbeat in the castle, smell the blood and smoke and ancient stone. Her muscles sang with strength she'd never possessed. The vampires hesitated. Sensing the change, Alara moved. She grabbed a fallen sword impossibly heavy moments ago. Now, light as air in her enhanced grip, and swung at the nearest vampire. He barely blocked in time, his eyes widening with shock as she pressed the attack with speed that shouldn't have been possible for a human. What did you do? Serafini demanded. Even the odds, Alara snarled. Her voice strange to her own ears. The vampire blood wouldn't last long. Lord Cashin had warned her it gave humans temporary enhancement but burned through their systems quickly. She had minutes at most. But minutes might be enough. She fought with desperate ferocity, using every technique Lord Cashin had drilled into her during their training sessions. Block, parry, strike. Don't try to overpower them. Use their momentum against them. Aim for joints and throats where even vampires were vulnerable. The sword found its mark in one vampire's knee, bringing him down. She kicked another in the chest, sending him crashing into the others, but the enhancement was already fading. She could feel it draining away, her human limitations reasserting themselves with each passing second. Serafini's expression had shifted from amusement to cold fury. Enough of this, she gestured, and the remaining vampires converged on Alara as one. There were too many. Even with the enhancement, even with all her training, Alara knew she couldn't win. She'd bought Lord Cashin time, but not enough. Then Lord Cashin was there, the sword ripped from his side, his face a mask of controlled agony and absolute determination. You want to fight? He said to Serafini, his voice carrying ancient power that made the very air vibrate. Then fight me. Blood challenge, old law. Just you and me. Serafini laughed. Why would I accept that when I can simply? Because if you don't, Lord Cashin interrupted, I'll invoke the conclave. Every house will be summoned to witness your cowardice. The Night Court will have to investigate your illegal entry, your fabricated charges, your violation of sacred territory during a sanctioned feeding bond. His eyes blazed. You wanted to destroy me politically? I'll destroy you the same way. The threat landed. Alara saw the calculation flash across Serafini's face, the weighing of risks, the consideration of how the other houses might react. Very well, Serafini said finally. Blood challenge. To the death or submission. She drew her own blade, a wicked curved thing that gleamed like captured moonlight. Winner takes the Winterwood territories and all associated claims. Agreed, Lord Cashin said. No. Alara grabbed his arm, feeling the blood seeping through his shirt. You're injured. You can't. I can and I will. He touched her face gently, his cold fingers trembling against her skin. This is the only way to protect you. To protect everyone. Through their bond, she felt his resolution absolute and unshakable. If I fall, run. The catacombs. Don't look back. Cashin, promise me. Tears burned her eyes. I promise. He kissed her forehead, brief and tender, then turned to face Serafini. The other vampires fell back, forming a circle. Even they wouldn't violate the sanctity of a formal blood challenge. Alara's heart hammered as she watched Lord Cashin take his position. Wounded and outnumbered, but standing with the dignity of 300 years of House Mordain pride, Serafini smiled and raised her blade. For House Corvus, she said. And the new order. For House Mordain, Lord Cashin replied. And the laws that bind us to our humanity. They struck. The duel was brutal and beautiful, two ancient vampires moving with speed that blurred the edges of reality. Steel rang against steel, sparks flying in the darkness. Serafini fought with vicious efficiency, targeting Lord Cashin's wounded side again and again. He parried and countered, his technique refined by centuries of practice. But Alara could see him weakening. Blood loss. The earlier battles. The wound that still hadn't healed. He was going to lose. Alara's hand went to her throat, where Lord Cashin had fed from her a week ago. Where their bond had been forged in blood and trust, and something deeper than either had dared name. She knew what she had to do. Stop. She shouted. Both vampires froze, bound by the rules of the challenge to acknowledge an interruption. Alara stepped into the circle. I invoke right of substitution. Silence fell like a physical weight. That's not possible, the golden-haired vampire said. You're human. I'm blood bonded to the challenger, Alara said, her voice steady despite her terror. Old law older than the accord states that blood-bonded allies can substitute in a challenge if both parties agree. She looked at Lord Cashin, seeing the horror and refusal already forming. I'm offering. Absolutely not, Lord Cashin said. It's my choice. She held his gaze, pouring everything she felt through their bond. Trust me, please. Do you accept my substitution? She watched him war with himself, the desire to protect her clashing against the reality that he was too wounded to win. That if he refused, they both died anyway. Alara, he whispered, and it sounded like goodbye. Do you accept? A single tear traced down his pale cheek. Yes. Serafini's laughter was like breaking ice. Oh, this is delicious. Very well, little human. I accept your challenge. She raised her blade, and Alara knew she had seconds to live, unless her final gambit worked. Chapter 10. Dawn's Coasira faced Serafini with nothing but a stolen sword and a plan built on desperation. You can still withdraw, Serafini said, circling with predatory grace. Beg for mercy. I might even grant it after I've taken everything Cashin loves and made him watch. I'm not withdrawing. Alara shifted her grip on the sword, remembering every lesson Lord Cashin had drilled into her. But I am offering terms. Serafini paused, curiosity flickering across her perfect features. Terms? A wager. If I last 3 minutes against you without dying, you withdraw your forces and leave the Winterwood. Alara's voice carried through the hall. If I fall before then, House Mordain surrenders all territorial claims. Alara. No, Lord Cashin started forward, but 2 vampires held him back on Serafini's signal. Interesting, Serafini mused. But why would I accept when I can simply kill you and take what I want? Because every vampire here will witness it, Alara said, gesturing to the assembled forces. They'll see you accept a formal challenge from a human, something no house has done in 200 years. If you refuse now, you prove you're afraid. That House Corvus's vaunted strength is hollow when facing someone with no power at all. The manipulation was transparent, but it worked. Alara saw Serafini's pride flare, saw the calculation behind her blood-red eyes. To refuse would be to show weakness before her own allies. 3 minutes, Serafini agreed. But when you fall, I want Cashin to watch you die slowly. Agreed. Alara raised her sword, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Whenever you're ready. Serafini struck like lightning. Alara barely blocked the first blow, the impact sending shock waves through her arms. The second strike came from a different angle. She parried, but the vampire's blade sliced across her shoulder, drawing blood. Pain exploded through her, but Alara used it, letting it sharpen her focus. She couldn't match Serafini's speed or strength, but she could do something the vampire wouldn't expect. She could cheat. As Serafini pressed her attack, Alara gave ground not randomly, but according to the pattern she and Lord Cashin had planned. She backed toward the grand fireplace, where the iron poker rested in its stand. 3 steps. 2. Serafini's blade swept toward her throat. Alara dropped, rolled, and came up with the iron poker in her free hand. She swung it at Serafini's face. The vampire screamed, recoiling from the iron with smoking flesh where it had grazed her cheek. The momentary distraction was all Alara needed. She lunged with the sword, not at Serafini, but at the heavy chandelier's support rope. The blade cut through. The massive iron chandelier plummeted from the ceiling. Serafini looked up, a heartbeat too late. The chandelier crashed down, iron chains wrapping around her body. She shrieked as the metal burned into her skin, thrashing like a trapped animal. 1 minute, Alara gasped, watching the other vampires for any who might intervene. None moved. The rules of formal challenge held them frozen. 2 minutes, you treacherous. Serafini's curse dissolved into another scream as she tried to free herself from the iron chains. Alara kept her sword raised, her wounded shoulder screaming, her body shaking with adrenaline and terror and desperate hope. She didn't need to defeat Serafini. She just needed to survive. 2 minutes 30 seconds. Lord Cashin's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The challenge is satisfied. House Mordain has proven its strength through its bonded ally. Lady Serafini, do you yield? Serafini's eyes blazed with hatred, but she was pinned. The iron burned too hot for her to escape without severe injury. This isn't over. It is for tonight. Lord Cashin's voice carried absolute authority. By the old laws you invoked when accepting this challenge, the terms are binding. Withdraw your forces, or face judgment from the conclave for violation of sacred combat. For a long moment, Alara thought Serafini might refuse, might call her forces to attack regardless of tradition or law. But then the other vampires began to shift uneasily. Even House Corvus had limits to what it could do without losing the support of the allied houses. 3 minutes, Alara said softly. Serafini's expression twisted with fury. House Corvus withdraws. For now. She finally wrenched herself free from the chains, her skin blistered and smoking. But this insult will be repaid, Cashin. When next we meet, there will be no mercy, no terms, no quarter given. I'll be ready, Lord Cashin said. Serafini swept from the hall, her remaining forces following. Within moments, the castle was empty of all but House Mordain. Alara's sword clattered to the floor as her legs gave out. Lord Cashin caught her before she fell, gathering her against his chest with trembling hands. You brilliant, reckless, impossible woman, he breathed against her hair. You could have died, but I didn't. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his cold body pressed against hers. We didn't. They stood like that for a long moment. The castle silent around them, except for the crackling of fires and the distant sound of snow falling beyond the broken doors. Finally, Lord Cashin pulled back enough to examine her wounded shoulder. Let me see. It's not that bad, Alara lied. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. The bond isn't letting you hide it from me. I feel your pain. His fingers were gentle as they inspected the cut. You need stitches, and rest, and possibly your head examined for challenging an ancient vampire to single combat. It worked, didn't it? This time, he lifted her carefully, carrying her toward the stairs. We need to discuss your definition of following the plan exactly. I followed the spirit of the plan, Alara protested, but her exhaustion was winning. The adrenaline crush left her feeling hollow and shaky. Lord Cashin carried her to his personal chambers, rooms she'd never been permitted to enter before. He set her on the massive bed with infinite care, then went to gather medical supplies. As he cleaned and stitched her wound, the bond between them hummed with unspoken emotions, relief, gratitude, fear of what had almost happened. And underneath it all, something deeper that neither had given voice to yet. They'll come back, Alara said quietly. Serafini won't let this stand. I know. Lord Cashin tied off the final stitch. But we bought time. The conclave will convene now. They have to after what happened tonight. And House Corvus's violations will be examined publicly. He sat beside her on the bed, his storm gray eyes searching hers. You changed everything tonight, Alara. Not just the battle, but the entire political landscape. We changed it, she corrected. Together, he took her hand, threading his cold fingers through her warm ones. There's something I need to tell you. Something you deserve to know before. He paused. The blood bond we formed, it can be broken. If you want to leave, to return to a normal life, away from vampire politics and dangers, I can sever it. You'd be free. Alara's heart clenched. Is that what you want? No, the word was immediate and raw. But I want you to have the choice. I won't trap you in my world just because I've grown to. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Because you've become essential to me. She studied his face, the face she'd come to know in the quiet hours of study and training. In the desperate moments of battle, in the gentle care he showed when he thought she wasn't watching. This vampire who'd lived 300 years alone, who'd chosen honor over ease, who'd been willing to die to protect people who'd never know his name. I have a choice? Alara asked softly. Always. She leaned forward and kissed him, not the brief, fierce kiss from before the battle, but something slower, deeper, a promise made without words. When she pulled back, Lord Cashin's expression was stunned wonder. I choose to stay, Alara said. Not because I'm trapped. Not because of the bond. But because I want to. Because standing with you feels more real than anything in my life before. She touched his face. Because I love you. The confession hung between them, fragile and fierce. Alara, he whispered. I'm not human. I can't give you. I know what you are. I know what this means. She cut him off gently. I'm not asking for normal. I'm asking for this. For us. For whatever time we have. Whether it's years or decades or centuries, Lord Cashin interrupted. If you want them, his hand tightened on hers. The bond can be strengthened, made permanent. It would extend your life, give you years beyond normal human span. Not immortality, but, he searched her eyes. Time, real time, together. The offer settled over her like a cloak. Years, decades, time enough to truly know him, to build something that lasted beyond the immediate crisis. Yes, Alara said simply. I want that. Outside, the longest night of the year finally surrendered to dawn. Golden light crept through the windows, but Lord Cashin didn't retreat to the shadows. Instead, he pulled the heavy curtains closed and drew Alara into his arms. Then we begin, he murmured against her hair. A new chapter for House Mordain. Epilogue 6 months later. Spring transformed the Winterwood from a realm of shadow and ice into something gentler. Alara stood in the castle's newly repaired courtyard, reading the letter that had arrived from the Night Court. The conclave had ruled in House Mordain's favor. House Corvus would face sanctions for their illegal challenge. And Lord Cashin's territorial claims were formally recognized. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Good news? Lord Cashin appeared beside her, his approach silent as always.